track of them, and then we can have John answer them when we get to the end of his presentation. Okay, today we are the Chats with Champions, Skidompha's program is delighted to welcome John Bunker to talk about the Maine Heritage Orchard, what it is, and why we should care. Many of you may know John from the Common Ground Fair, where he stands at a table full of apples and offers to identify whatever apples people bring in. He's Maine's Apple Man and a self-taught fruit explorer. As a kid, John visited a friend in Maine when he was 11 and fell in love with Maine. He returned as frequently as he could in the summer, and then he went to Colby College. And with friends right after college, he bought land in Palermo and moved there and has been there ever since on what is now his super chili farm. As a young person, after several jobs, John was hired by Fedco Seeds right in Clinton, Maine, and became interested in gardening. And then he began to notice the abandoned fruit trees on Maine farms. Eventually, John would create Fedco Trees. This fascination for old fruit trees became a lifetime pursuit, and now for almost 50 years, he's been pulling over by the side of the road to marvel at ancient apple trees, has picked his way through old books and diaries, hung out with the old timers, grafted new trees, and made a lot of pies, sauce, and cider in his quest to rediscover the identity of forgotten apple varieties in Maine. Apples arrived with the first Europeans over 400 years ago and are certainly part of Maine's heritage. To preserve these apples and this heritage, John founded the Maine Heritage Orchard, and that's at the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Farm, MOFGA, in Unity. Right now, he will tell us about what it is and why we should care. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Mary. And I think Mary kind of told it all. So I think maybe I don't really need to say anything else, but I do want to thank everybody at Skidompha for having me on today. Thank you to Jeanette, and certainly thank you, Mary. Thank you for that kind introduction. And today's subject is going to be the Maine Heritage Orchard in sort of a, we'll say, a loose sense. And I'm going to try to wrap up before 11 o'clock so that we can have time for questions. And I'll answer as many as I can. This is the, I've done about 3 or 4 of these Zoom talks this year. They're very strange. I am currently in the Palermo Library all by myself, and it's weird, but it's doable. So I'm going to do some really different things today. Some of you have watched more than one of my talks, and I want to make every one of them different so that you'll keep coming back or run away screaming or something. But anyway, I'm going to try to entertain you. And so the history of apples in Maine and the history of apples, period, is really predicated on 2 basic facts. Many others too, but these 2. One is that the from seed, every apple seed will produce a new and unique tree. Every seed unique, as we say. And we'll get into that more, I suppose. The second is the large fruited apple is not native of America. It is native of Eastern Asia, and it found its way to Maine and the rest of North America by the Europeans when they came. So I'm actually going to, I'll explain this a little more in my next segment here of my talk. I'm going to, you may not believe it, but I'm going to sing you a song. And this is a song that I wrote some years ago. And it's called Not Far from the Tree. And I might sort of sing it and talk it, and we'll see. I've got a terrible voice, but maybe you'll survive if you care. So I love to take my basket, or actually my bucket. I love to take my bucket from its place upon the wall and go down to the fields collecting apples in the fall. Although the grass is high, I'll find them right down on my knees, because the apples, they don't fall very far from the trees. I take a path down through the woods to a place I like to go. It's an old abandoned orchard about which no one seems to know. There's apples scattered all around, more than you'll ever need. And the apples, they don't fall very far from the tree. Oh no, they do not fall far from the tree, although you just might lose some in the leaves. And if you want a black Oxford tree, don't plant a black Oxford seed. Now, I have a box in which I place the good ones I will keep, and the bad ones I will take and throw out on my compost heap. They say that leaving rotten apples tends to spread disease because the apples, they don't fall very far from the trees. Oh no, they do not fall far from the trees, although you just might lose some in the weeds. And if you plant a Starkey, or if you want a Starkey or a Rolf, there's Starkey is right there on my shirt, and there's Rolf up there somewhere. If you want a Starkey or a Rolf tree, don't plant a Starkey or a Rolf seed. Now I always try to treat that orchard with the best of care, for if one dies, you might not find a replacement anywhere. The seeds you save will not hold true to their variety, even though they don't fall very far from the tree. Oh no, they do not fall far from the tree, although you just might lose some in the weeds. And if you want a Colorado orange tree, that's one they just discovered out in Colorado, don't plant a Colorado seed, Colorado orange seed. Well, now you're probably wondering about your favorite tree. How is it we can pass along our best varieties? Save some new wood. That's what this is. It's a piece of scion wood. Save some new wood and then graft it to a seedling tree. And we'll save all those ancient apples for posterity. Oh no, they do not fall far from the tree, although you just might lose some in the weeds. And if you want a Walbridge tree, that's one they just discovered out in Boise, Idaho. Now, don't you plant a Walbridge seed. Now, one thing I should mention before my song is nearly through. Sometimes it's a mixed blessing that the seedlings don't come true. Otherwise, we'd never get no new varieties, and we'd be stuck with the same old apples for eternity. Oh no, they do not fall far from the trees, although you just might lose some in the leaves. But if you want a Kavanaugh, this is right from Damariscotta, where Skidompha is, this incredible apple. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? If you want a Kavanaugh tree, don't expect one if you plant a Kavanaugh seed. Well, the rich get richer and the poor stay poor. And I know it's plain to see that the apples, they don't fall very far from the tree. If you want to save the world, I'll tell you what to do. Just be thankful that your kids are not the same as you. Okay, there we go. There's my song. I'll shut up. I won't sing anymore. Okay, so that gives you an idea of seedlings. And from the seed, they don't come true. You got to graft them using cyanwood. That's what we do when we collect these old apples. Now, so let's see, where next? There are many reasons to save the old varieties. One is it connects us, saving them connects us to our place where we live. It connects us to our orchard history, to our history, all of our history. These apples also, many of them make the best pies, sauce, butter, cake, bread, cider, molasses. This one that I just sang about, Kavanaugh, is a just phenomenal applesauce apple, and fried. Oh, fried, it's just delicious. And the Black Oxford that I mentioned, that one keeps all winter in the root cellar. The Starkey is one that is, look at those dots. The Starkey is a delicious dessert apple, fresh eating. And the Rolf, all purpose. It was sort of a Macintosh before Macintosh came around. This one is from Piscataquis County. Starkey from Vassalboro in Kennebec County, and Black Oxford from, of course, Oxford County. These are all Maine apples. They also are part of a huge amount of genetic diversity that that breeders will need and already need and are utilizing as they attempt to breed the apples for the future of agriculture for the 21st century. These have a great amount of diversity. They've also been through a lot. They've proven themselves over the course of time. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually read something to you that I wrote recently. Magnificent ancient apple trees can still be found scattered throughout much of Maine. Look for them behind old barns, next to abandoned cellar holes, along roadsides, nestled in thickets, sometimes even beside a gas station or a convenience store parking lot. The ancient apple trees of Maine were spreading their branches and producing bountiful crops even before Maine joined the Union 200 years ago this year. They are the survivors, the ones who lived through the summer of 1816 when there was no summer. They are the ones who lived through half a dozen famously cold test winters, including the brutal 1933-34. They lived through the hurricane of 1938, the drought of 1947, not to mention waves of gypsy moth, browntail, scab, fire blight, decades of acid rain, polluted water, and everything else. As we struggle to make sense of the COVID-19 pandemic, we might consider taking a look at the old apple trees. There's a chance that everything we need to know about survival these trees have known for millennia. Here's a few tips gleaned from the trees themselves. Don't move. You don't need to convince an old apple tree about the value of sheltering in place. They've been perfectly content to stand in one spot for 200 years. They're well aware that everything you need in life is right here at home. They know that everything you need to learn, you can learn wherever you are. If you're willing to stay put, as the old jazz standard says, you'll see your castles in Spain through your window pane back in your own backyard. As Ram Dass liked to say, be here now. Or as Gary Snyder put it, don't move. Build community. The old apple trees are masters at creating community right where they are. They understand the value of deep roots. They are the ultimate collaborators. They know well the folly of competition. They share everything. They hoard nothing. Often I'll come across one of these old trees with perfect looking fruit. It looks like it came from the grocery store cooler. Never sprayed, never pruned, never fertilized, living in a tangle of grasses, goldenrod, yarrow, milkweed, elderberries, alder, even white pine. How do they do it? At first glance, it looks like they're living in chaos, but they're not. They've created a community above and below ground with an organization so elegant and so complex that we humans may never understand it. It's a balanced ecosystem. They are living in harmony, sharing their fruit and everything else, feeding and healing one another, all the while communicating with their own solar-powered, subterranean, original version of the World Wide Web. Waste not, want not. You don't need to tell an old apple tree about being conservative. They don't need a pandemic to get that. Apple trees are the true conservatives. They conserve everything. They put the so-called human conservatives to shame. Give them a dot of land, a scratch of soil, a few drops of water, a breath of air, and they will thrive. In times of drought, they simply slow down their growth. In times of plenty, they put on new wood and produce great crops of fruit. They've been living that way for hundreds of thousands of years. Not only that, surprisingly enough, they don't wreck the air and the water they use. They improve it and pass it along even cleaner than it was. Eat local. To the old apple tree, the local food system is the secure food system. They have no desire to obtain food from away. They prefer the fresh produce they can get right here at home. It's always available. It's good for you, and it has no carbon footprint. They are the ultimate local food geeks. They also compost everything: leaves, twigs, branches, bark, even old logs, uneaten fruit, and the occasional squirrel or deer carcass. Nothing gets flushed down the drain or dumped into the river. It all gets grown right here and eaten right here. They are the ultimate organic gardeners participating in the perfect, secure food system. Grace and flexibility. The old apple trees are the epitome of grace and flexibility. Give them a heavy, wet spring snowstorm, or a massive crop of fruit, and they just bend. There's an old medieval saying, the mow appelin the tree beareth, the mow she boweth to the folk. We should all be practicing bowing these days. Bowing is far more graceful than shaking hands anyway. When the weight is too great, here and there the occasional branch gives way rather than taking down the whole tree. That's just nature's pruning. When a hungry bear or porcupine creates a mess up high, the tree sees it as a growth opportunity. The fallen branches and debris become compost, and by next year, you'll find all this fresh, young growth up in the tree where recently it looked like destruction. A few years later, that young growth will translate into strong young branches and lots of fruit. When the weight is too great, The old trees simply lay down. Next summer, one of the younger branches will rise to become a new vertical trunk. The old stump eventually rots away, but the tree lives on. To the ancient apple tree, there's nothing adverse about adversity. It's just life. Would that we could all enjoy traveling less, enjoying our yards and our neighbors more, tending our gardens, eating local, expressing grace in everything we do. If you look closely, you might see the old apple trees smile as they watch us bicker endlessly about who's right and who's wrong and who's to blame. To the old apple tree, all facts are neutral. Bickering only distracts us from healing life's inevitable wounds with new wood. As we rebuild civilization after the pandemic tide goes out, perhaps we could all take a few hints from the old apple tree. At the Maine Heritage Orchard, we have saved about 300 of these old varieties that were grown historically in Maine. I have 16 of them on my shirt. I can't really show you very well, but those are one from each county. Maine has 16 counties. And the 4 that I showed you earlier, up close and personal, are 4 of my favorites. In the late 19th century, Maine was, as much of the US was going through, but Maine in particular was going through a transition from the small diversified farm to the large commodity farms that we knew of in the 20th century. And that was the period when these old varieties were really last planted. There may have been 1,000 varieties in Maine at that time. But once we hit the 20th century, that gene pool imploded, so to speak, and we were reduced to, maybe 10 or 20 varieties at the most. Macintosh became king and all that. As we are now currently, those of us involved at the Maine Heritage Orchard are currently involved in a rush to attempt to find the old varieties before they all die. The lifespan of an apple tree is typically around, if it's grown on a seedling standard rootstock, typically around 100 years. That would take us back to 1920. Sometimes they grow to be 150, which would take us back to, about 1870. Sometimes 200, which would take us back to 1820. But the oldest trees now in Maine are dying out very rapidly, not necessarily because of any particular climatic conditions or anything, but probably mostly just because they're getting old. So if we're going to save these trees, now is the time. And that's why right now there's Mainers and people all across the US, but we're talking about Maine here. We have Mainers who have joined me in this search over the last 20, 30 years. We're attempting to track these down before they're gone forever, because once they're gone, they're gone. Now, the Maine Heritage Orchard does a number of things. We preserve these rare varieties. We also research and experiment with innovative orcharding techniques. Our orchard is in a renovated gravel pit. We also do a lot of educational work. We have workshops, classes. We have a stewardship program where you can grow one of the trees in the orchard. We do grafting classes and so forth and so on. We're also working with Washington State University and others to DNA test all of our varieties. We've done some so far to do a couple of things. One is to add to the sort of, we'll call it national database of the rarest varieties, because many of these only exist in Maine. And also to verify what we have, because some of what we have does exist other places, and we want to make sure that what we have is correct. So we we're in a we'll say sort of a tight spot now. And the tight spot is that because the old trees are dying, it is up to us, those of us, all of us, to think together about, is this genetic material important? And if so, what can we do to protect and save it? I tend to think that it is important, and I think that we should be saving it. So let's see, what else was I going to mention? I also do Apple IDs, and if you're interested, and people ask me why I do the Apple IDs, and I do them because it connects me with people from around Maine who are growing old trees. It also connects me with, and connects us with, old varieties, because frequently it is through these Apple IDs that we discover old trees and old varieties that we didn't know existed before. I have a little cheat thing here. This is my email address, idapples@mafca.org. I'll hold that up for a second, idapples@mafca.org. And if you have something you'd like me to look at, you can send me that. If you also have questions about the Maine Heritage Orchard and want to learn more, or want to learn how you can support what we do, you can email me there too, and I can fill you in. We have all sorts of ways that you can help. So I'm going to read you a poem, and I'm going to then open it up. We should have quite a bit of time for some questions. I also want to tell you what you can do to help us. You can become Sherlock Holmes yourself, and keep an eye out for old trees. We're looking for the ones that are ancient, hollow, broken down, look like they're 3/4 dead or 9/10 dead. That's what we're looking for. And if you find something like that, contact Skidompha or contact me. And if you contact them, they'll put you in touch with me. You can send me your apples to ID, and I'll see if I can help you with that. You could come to the Maine Heritage Orchard and see what we've done. I think it's open. I'm not sure. You contact MAFCA, go to mafca.org and contact them. And plant a tree. Okay, so I'm gonna read you a poem if I can find it. And then I'm gonna hope that I get to see Mary again. I can't see anybody here. I'm hoping that somebody's out there somewhere. This is a poem from the 14th century, and it's from a poet named Hafiz, Hafiz, who was a Persian mystical poet. And this was translated by Daniel Ladinsky. So here we go. It's called An Apple Tree Was Concerned. An apple tree told me it was concerned about a late frost and losing its gift that could help feed a poor family close by. And then there were the jams and lots of apple butter that could be made in a banner crop year when the clouds were generous with what fell from them, and the sun rationed itself with precision. They can speak, trees. They can say the sweetest things and can even tell a joke. But it takes special ears to hear them, ears that have listened to people with great care. So thank you very much, and let's see if we can answer some questions.
Okay, thanks very much, John. I loved your song. It was wonderful.
Okay.
And the life of the old apple tree is something that's pretty important to all of us. There's one of the questions was a person was submitted earlier, and they had that really old tree in Friendship. And in 2013, it had a successful graft, and she wanted to know the name that you gave to this apple graft.
So I'm really glad that you wrote in, and there were, I think, 3 different apples that I collected in Friendship that year, 2013. So what I'd like you to do, if you're listening in, is to send me an email at idapples@mafca.org, and I'm going to help you figure out which one it was. And I believe that at least 2 of the 3 are currently in the Maine Heritage Orchard. So let's talk about it.
Okay, somebody else asked about how many different kinds of apples that are at the Heritage Orchard. I think you said, was it 300?
Yeah, currently there are 300 apples and a few pears, and so we're also looking for rare historic pears in Maine, and also plums. But plums, excuse me, are very short-lived, so the chances of us finding the really old plums are pretty rare. But yes, it's about 300, and of those 300, some originated in other states, but were grown traditionally in Maine, and that's why we've included them. Others we know originated in Maine, like I was showing you the Black Oxford, and the Rolfe and the Starkey and the Kavanaugh. And there's quite a few that originated here. And then there's a bunch of them that we've found that are ancient trees, but we have not yet identified them. And those we're saving with provisional names. And we also are working with geneticists to see if we can figure out either what the variety is, if it's on record anywhere, or what might be in its parentage. So about 300 right now. And we don't, originally when I started doing this work, I decided that I would only save varieties that I knew the name of. And then I realized, oh my goodness, some of the most wonderful old trees that I was finding, I had no idea what the name was. And I may never know, because there were so many local varieties that only originated in a town or a county or whatever. So that I really needed to save, or we needed to save, even the ones that we don't know the names of. So that's part of the work that we're doing now, is to, and it's extremely time consuming. I can spend days, even weeks on a variety, on one apple, trying to identify it. But anyway, yeah, so about 300.
One of the other questions is, you said that the apples came with the Europeans. Did they bring a scion? Did they know how to graft, or did they bring a seed and got a wild variant? And we like some of those.
For the most part, they brought, when the Europeans came over, they, for the most part, brought seed. There are native apples in North America. They would be what you would call crab apples. They're pretty much inedible. Many of them are ornamental. But the large fruited apple was brought over as seed from Europe by pretty much all Europeans who came brought them. Occasionally, they would bring a variety as a scion, grafted in a tub, but you can imagine just a little handful of seeds would be hundreds of seeds. And so even though they knew, or many of them knew, that the seeds do not come true, as I sang, they were content to bring seed anyway. Many of the seeds produced small, bitter apples. Well, they made great cider. So that was fine with them. And then the ones that were more palatable, they made into sauce or pies or, whatever, butter, cake, or bread. And then some kept really well. They put them in the root cellar. And over time, different selections of these seeds that were planted became well known locally. And some, like, for example, we'll say the Kavanaugh here from Damascotta. Really, the furthest away that I've seen it is Freeport, which is probably, I don't know, maybe 50 miles or so. Whereas other apples like, for example, the Baldwin, which originated in Massachusetts, became very popular in many, many states. So some of these seedling selections early on were really only known in a town or two, and others became iconic. Ben Davis, Baldwin, Rhode Island Greening, Roxbury Russet. Some of these became very, very famous apples. So most of the apples, if you get into we'll say North American apple history, most of the apples that were grown here traditionally are these selections from the seeds that were planted by Europeans when they came over. Of course, some of them were seedlings of seedlings of seedlings, since the apple immediately fell in love with North America and began to spread itself by seed almost everywhere. So especially in Maine this time of year, you can find apples growing along the side of the road or the side of the stream, sometimes even a few feet from the ocean. You can find them all over everywhere.
When did they figure out how to do scions, or did they already know that in Europe? Because
they've been grafting for many hundreds of years.
Oh, okay.
But most farmers who were jack of all trades, masters of none, most farmers did not graft, and so when grafting in North America began to become popular, which was really over 200 years ago, then a lot of it was done by itinerant grafters who would have a bunch of scion wood in their saddlebag and come to your farm and say, what would you like? And that's really how those early varieties began to get spread around.
Is there a Reader's Digest version of how you identify an apple? With all these different varieties that you're dealing with, and
hold on.
Okay.
That's just the segue into my book. So this is Apples and the Art of Detection, which is a collaboration between me and Sherlock Holmes, and he's my number one mentor. Number two would be Watson. And so if you want to learn more about how I've learned to identify apples, you can get a copy of the book at Sherman's bookstore right next to the library in Damascotta. You can also get it in a few other bookstores in Maine. And you can write to me at idapples@mofga.org, or go to our website, outonalimapples.com, and we can sell it to you there. There is really no good apple keys on identifying varieties that are currently available. I'm working on one, which is a massive multiple year project, and eventually we'll hope to have something online.
Yeah, so somebody asked if there were any interesting new finds that you've had recently, or are there always new finds every year?
No, there are. I think that one of the most interesting to me this year was a variety called Tatovsky, which is a Russian apple that was brought over about 1810, 1815. along with other Russian apples, 3 other Russians that some Mainers and others would recognize the names. One is Duchess, or Duchess of Oldenburg. Another one is Alexander and Red Astrakhan. And those 3 apples, Duchess, Alexander, and Red Astrakhan, are fairly common amongst rare apples, particularly up in the county in northern Maine, in Aroostook County. But Tatovsky is very difficult to find. And I'm pretty sure that we just found one in with the help of Todd Little-Siebold, one of the Maine Heritage Orchard people that I work with, found in Prospect. Also, we have also found, I think, one called Day of Maine in Strong, Maine, which is in Franklin County, and that one originated up there and somewhere in Franklin County or Somerset County, and I think we finally found that on the original farm where it grew from seed. One of the things that we do is we attempt to track down the location where the trees were grown. I mean, it makes sense. Because so many of these are local varieties, and because they were only grown in a certain restricted geographical area, your best bet to find, when I was able to find this one, Starkey, it originated in Vassalboro, and that was where I searched. And with the help of an old timer named Frank Getchell, who became a close friend, he was able to verify that I had found it, and at that point I had found the last remaining tree in Vassalboro. It turned out we found one more, and I think since then we may have found one in the town of Mercer and one in down the coast, maybe down the Kennebec River somewhere. But these are very rare, and your best bet is to find them, where they were traditionally grown. So we look at ag yearbooks, we look at fair books, we look at old nursery catalogs. We talk to old timers. People send me letters. And they say, and one called American Beauty, which originated in Massachusetts but was grown in Maine. Of course, back then they were the same state. She came up after a talk and said, well, I don't think you're going to be very interested in this, but we have an American Beauty on our old farm. And I went, okay, I'll be over tomorrow. So you might think that, in fact, another fun one was one in, I think it's in Piscataquis County, which is northwest Maine. A woman had one called the Bunghole Russet, which she said made great cider. And that, I'm sure, was a local variety. And unfortunately, the Bunghole Russet is gone. But it's in some ways, it's lonely work. I spent a lot of time sitting at my dining room table, staring at apples and looking at old books and wondering why I'm doing that. But in another way, it is the ultimate in collaboration, because I couldn't do this without, your help. And in fact, Mary, my host here, has been a help to me as we've attempted to figure out what was going on in the Damariscotta, Noblesboro, and Newcastle area, all over Maine, and now increasingly beyond, all over the country. I and we are joining together with others to support each other as we do this very local, very interesting, and I think really important work.
Somebody asked about crab apples. It doesn't sound like they're that important, but what's the story about crab apples and the Maine Heritage Orchard?
Crab apples are very important, and for my education in crab apples, I have primarily relied on a book called Crab Apples, the Genus Malus, M-A-L-U-S. So apples, all apples are very closely related. The small ones, the crab apples, and the large ones, the domestica, the ones that we eat, these. They're all very closely related, and they all will cross with one another. The pollen will cross. And so many of these apples have some what you would call crabapple in their genetics. It's just that we have generally, for our culinary and dessert purposes, we've selected the larger fruiting ones. But the crab apples, the small fruited apples, are very important in the genetics of apples. And also, many of them are excellent fruits. Some of our favorite tasting apples for fresh eating are these crab apples. And some of my personal favorites, one is called Trailman, which is, it's about the size of a small egg, a really small egg. And it's fantastic. Wixon, that's another really excellent apple that most people would call a crab apple. Chestnut, another one. So Centennial, there are many very delicious and very worthwhile crab apples. And we do have some in our collection. Generally, what we use as our definition of a crab apple is simply an apple under 2 inches in diameter, a small apple.
Okay, somebody asked if there was a heritage apple that is thin-skinned and it keeps well.
My favorite thin-skinned keeper is Northern Spy. And Northern Spy is a more popular apple. And there are, in fact, still some commercial orchards in Maine that grow it. So it is, we'll say, not endangered, but it is more and more rare. It is very thin-skinned and it bruises quite easily. And yet, also I should say parenthetically, it is a truly excellent pie apple. It also keeps in the root cellar. And what I noticed when I built my own root cellar and started to collect old varieties and store them and so forth. And I was getting my Northern Spies from these old trees, and sometimes I was picking up drops on the ground and so forth. And the Northern Spies, even bruised, they keep really well. So there's something about them that is able to sort of isolate. And I'm not a plant physiologist, so somebody might spit at me for saying this, but somehow they can isolate those dings and dongs and bruises and still keep extremely well. So if you're looking for a thin-skinned keeper, try Northern Spy.
Yep, and you can get Northern Spies at Bisky Orchard. I just got some, and they're great big ones this year.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yep.
And where is that orchard?
Bisky Orchard's on Bisky Road in Damascotta.
Okay, there you go.
Yep. And somebody else asked, are there other places that people can buy heritage orchards or heritage apples? I know that there's Bailey's, and you'd have to Google that.
I am a huge fan of Maine commercial orchards, and I think the same would be true if I lived in any state. But I like to go anytime I see a commercial orchard and I have a minute to drop in, or half an hour or an hour, I'll just pull over and drive in and say hello. And one of the things that I usually do is I say to them, of course, many of them I know now, but the ones that I don't know is I will say, what do you have that's a little unusual? And often in the farm stand or the orchard store or whatever, they have the usual fare, the Cortlands and Macs and Honeycrisp up here, McCown maybe. But often they have a few trees of this or that maybe are not even, out in the farm stand. So you can find at least a few at almost any orchard. Unfortunately, right now we're in late October. A lot of the farm stands at the commercial orchards are beginning to close down. But I would say try just going to whatever orchard is near you, wherever you are, and ask them. And if they don't grow heirlooms, bug them. Tell them, hey, you should grow some more heirlooms.
Are heirloom apples, are the heritage apples, are they less prone to disease in general?
Well, that's hard to say. Some of them, not Northern Spy, have very thick skin. Baldwin in particular has a very thick skin, and there's some I've read here and there of fruit writers saying that they felt like it was disease resistant and insect resistant because of its tough skin. There's it's hard to say where insect resistance comes from. How much of it is the varieties and how much of it is the environment in which they're growing. And like I mentioned in my reading there from about old apples in the pandemic, many of these old varieties have lived through multiple insect bombardments over the decades, over the centuries, and somehow they've survived. Now, and occasionally I do find apples on these old trees that look perfect. And so why is that? And I guess what I would say is I have a little motto which I call multifactorial synergy, which to me means you get an old apple tree growing by the side of the road. It could sometimes be a young apple tree, and it's growing in a thicket of alder and pine and bushes and elderberries and you know what, and then you don't know what, and it's never been pruned or fertilized or sprayed or anything. And you look at the fruit and it's perfect, and you say, well, what is this? And you take a graft from that, go home with it, graft it in your orchard, and it gets all the same diseases as everything else. So what is that? I think there's a lot going on in the environment, the ecosystem, the micro ecosystem of every apple tree that we're just beginning to learn. We'll put it that way.
Somebody asked, how come there's just a limited number of apples in grocery stores, besides the fact that those are the ones that we buy? And there's another associated question with that, and that is Honeycrisp apples. Does the University of Minnesota get money for every Honeycrisp apple that's sold?
No, they probably wish they did.
Yeah.
They used to get some money for every tree of Honeycrisp that was sold. But that was because the tree was patented, or the variety was patented. It used to be that when the land grant colleges got started towards the end of the 19th century, many of them, maybe even all of them, but many of them had breeding programs, not just for apples, but for all sorts of vegetables and fruits. And all those were put into the public domain and made free for anyone to use. That changed more recently when we'll say, this is a simplistic look, but we'll say government funding ended and these programs had to fund themselves. And the only way they could fund themselves would be to patent the plants. And I understand that. I don't like it, but I understand it. It's reasonable. The government doesn't really have the inclination, we'll say, to support a lot of this work anymore. So that's where things like patenting come in. The first part of your question, that was a two-part question. What was the other part you said?
Oh, how come there's just 4 or 5 varieties in the grocery store?
So when you have a small diversified farm, then you would, and pretty much the vast majorities of Mainers lived on these small farms. You would have half a dozen apple trees, or maybe 15 apple trees or 20 apple trees. A large orchard 120 years ago in Maine would have been 100 trees. And you also had cows and potatoes and hogs. And if you were on the coast, you had blueberries, or you had, or you did a little fishing, and so forth and so on. It was a small diversified farm. If you didn't have a very good apple crop that year, well, you had potatoes, or you had hogs, or you made butter or whatever. So the apples were part of a system. And if you didn't get a good crop one year, that was okay. When we moved to the commodity form of orcharding and dairy and so forth and so on, then if you don't get an apple crop every year, you're done. That's it. It's over. You can't wait till next year because you are now bankrupt.
Hmm.
So in the modern apple industry, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, and seventh most important things are that the fruit is annually bearing. That's number 1 through 10, maybe. If it doesn't bear annually, or at least have a decent crop annually, then you can't grow it. Or if you grow it, you still have to grow a bunch of the annual bearers also. That's one of the primary reasons why McIntosh became so popular. And if you look at the varieties in the grocery store, well, now they have a little bit of flexibility because they're grown all over the world. So if you don't get a good crop in Maine, you get it from Chile or South Africa. But that's one of the primary criteria. Another is that the fruit ship well, because we're eating, if you go to the grocery stores in Maine right now, it's, well, now you probably get a lot of local stuff, which is great. But if you go in March or April or May, you're getting fruit that's grown somewhere else in the world. So it has to travel a long distance. And it also has to look in a way that the marketers think that the consumers want them to look. Honeycrisp was a big stretch because it's not solid red or solid green or solid yellow. It actually has stripes, which is like, wow, that's really, out there. But what about this apple? I mean, who would buy this? It doesn't even look like an apple. In fact, my wife the other day, I had one, she knows Kavanaugh quite well, but I had one that was particularly conic, and she saw it on the counter and said, "Is that a pear?" I mean, and look at it, it's ugly. It's got these ugly brown parts and ugly green and dots, but I actually think this is beautiful. And I think what's happening is, and look at this thing, it's the wrong color. It's the color of a croquet ball or something. More and more now, people are starting to say, well, you know what? I don't mind if there is a ding or a dong on my apple tree. That's okay. A little insect damage is okay. And other people are saying, well, you know what? Stripes are actually kind of pretty. And a stripe or two, I can handle that. And also, most of the varieties in the grocery stores now are used for one purpose and one purpose only. That is for dessert or fresh eating. And more people want to eat apples that are good for something else, like the Northern Spy and the pie and other great pie apples in Maine. Well, we have Red Astrakhan, I mentioned, and Duchess of Oldenburg, I mentioned. Wealthy, fantastic fall pies, 20 ounce. These are all apples that by somebody's definition are ugly, by mine are quite beautiful, and make great pies. Redfield is a modern apple, 1938 or so, and it is red fleshed, and you'd never want to eat it fresh if you unless you like something that is incredibly tart, but it makes excellent sauce and it makes an excellent pie. Often people eat these old varieties for the first time and they go, ooh, who would eat that? Well, they were never intended to be eaten fresh. They were supposed to be in molasses or in cake or in cider, so we people who say, I don't like this apple because I can't eat it fresh. Try eating a raw potato sometime and tell me how you like it. And then will you not grow that variety of potato?
Yeah, good point. Somebody said, would you please tell us about the enthusiasm of the volunteers planting apple trees in the old Heritage Orchard?
The enthusiasm of them?
Yeah, I guess that he was there with his family and said it was
Okay.
just a wonderful event.
Well, pre-COVID, and we're hoping that in the next 30 years there'll be a post-COVID. We have a planting day in the spring where we plant the new varieties, the new discoveries. So when we discover an apple, then we go collect the twigs, the scionwood, exhibit A, and we graft it. And then 2 years later, we have these trees that are about 4 or 5 feet tall, and we go out in a group, sometimes as many as 30 or 40 people, and we plant these new trees out there, and everybody gets a chance to do it, young and old. We do a demonstration and a pep talk, and there's volunteers who are very experienced there, and staff. The Mafka Heritage Orchard has a wonderful staff of 2 right now. And that's one of the reasons why it's so expensive to keep this whole thing going, and why we're, always looking for your support. And so the staff and the volunteers all gather, and then whoever wants to comes, and we plant trees and we plant companions. So I mentioned innovative orcharding at the Heritage Orchard, and we have hundreds of other species of plants, herbaceous and woody, that we're planting in our orchard as a way of mimicking that roadside, remember that multifactorial synergy. We're trying to mimic that as best we can by creating a balanced ecosystem that will attract pollinators, and it will have insect confusers. So we want to create an environment that is rich underground and above ground with the other plants that we plant, and we do all that on our planting days as well. So yes, it has been really fun, and the first, although every year has been really, really good, I'll have to say that first year, which was the spring of 2014, was pretty magical when we were able to plant the first batch of trees. But every year is good, and we would love to have you join us.
Yeah. So there's a lot of maintenance that has to happen with well, I don't know if it's a lot of maintenance for the Heritage Orchard. Yeah. So it's not something you just plant the trees and go away and mow in between them.
Yes, and there is a lot of maintenance, and that's that's why the Heritage Orchard is different from a museum. And I love museums, and but there was a piece written in I think maybe in the New York Times or somewhere, a year or 2 ago, about a chair in a museum. And the chair, and the piece was written from the perspective of the chair, and the chair was looking out longingly at the people going by, saying, "Please come sit in me. No one has sat in me since 1522, and I'm just so lonely." And we need museums to be able to look at the chairs that people sat in 1522, and to look at the paintings that Monet or Rembrandt or somebody painted. This is different. This is actually not a museum. This is a living orchard. So when you eat a Starkey, you are taking a bite out of the same apple that Moses Starkey, who was a Quaker carpenter and minister and farmer in Vassalboro, Maine, this is the same apple that he was eating. It's remarkable. This is like time traveling when you do this. And so this is very different. And to do this, to keep these genetics, to keep this diversity available for future generations, we can't just take this. At the fair, I often would have a display of 100 or 200 varieties. And people come up to me and they say, "Now, do you have to collect these every year, or can you just use the same ones every year?" And I say, "Well, you know what? By about January or February, certainly by next July, these will all be compost." So if we're going to do this work, whether it's avocados or apples or carrots or tomatoes, it requires that someone that someone step up to the plate and say, "Look, this is important enough for us to support this." I think of this as a gift from past generations, that these old trees that I have found, and others found and introduced to me, these trees are a gift from the past, and in most cases, an anonymous gift from the past. These are from people who may not have ever even tasted the fruit from the tree that they grafted. They may have grafted the tree when they were 80 years old, and then they died. But they knew that the variety was important to them. They wanted to keep it going, and they wanted it to be there when I came along, or you came along, or whoever came along. So this variety here, I keep talking about the Kavanaugh because, you know, we're in Skidompha land here. This was grafted by my apprentice now 14 years ago. And he grafted it. He did not tag it because he was somebody who tags offended him. So he grafted all over our farm and never told me what he was grafting. And then he passed away tragically about 4 years after he had grafted this tree. And I didn't know what it was. And every year I would wait patiently to see what was going to come from this tree. And then it fruited. And it fruited with these beautiful Kavanaugh apples. And so I think of him, his name was Nate. I think of Nate as one of those anonymous grafters as in the past. They are passing on the baton. The baton is the scionwood. And when you take a piece of scionwood from the past, from a gift, from someone who never knew you, it is, I think, my responsibility to pass this on to the future by grafting a new tree and then making that available to your children, to your grandchildren. We can let this all go, or we can choose to keep it going. And I think we should keep it going.
Okay, so just so we're about 15 minutes, it's 11:15, but I have a question about if people want to contribute and help to finance the Heritage Orchard, is that different than giving money to MAFCA? And the other question I have is, do you have a successor who is out wandering around trying to find old apple trees?
So
keep this whole thing going.
Okay, so as far as supporting our work, you could call MAFCA, or you could just go to mafca.org and contact MAFCA and tell them that you're interested in supporting in whatever way. You could also contact me at idapples@mafca.org because I can connect you with people. If you make a contribution to MAFCA, which are always welcome, that would go to either a program of your choice. It could be, you know, anything that we do. It could be the low impact forestry or, you know, whatever. But if you make a contribution to the Heritage Orchard, you would just make a contribution to MAFCA, and then include a note saying that it was going to go to the Heritage Orchard. So that's how that works. We are working on a new program where you can do a monthly thing from your credit card, where you would support one of our trees, and every month we would take out a small amount from your credit card or bill your credit card, and then you would be able to support one of our trees, you know, as long as you want. As far as successors are concerned, I had thought that I was just going to do this by myself, and I was, you know, had accepted that. Now, in recent years, there have been a number of younger people who have, and some, you know, contemporaries, who have joined me in this work. So now we have a really good group now of probably close to 20 in Maine alone really dedicated, what we call fruit explorers. And they are working closely with me and closely with each other. And we share our finds and the best of them or the rarest of them or whatever we are, then some one of us is grafting and then getting them into the Heritage Orchard. So I'm really optimistic about the future of who's interested in this. There's also groups in a number of parts of the country that are also working on their local historic apple varieties. And so that's been really exciting to work with people in other parts of the country as well. This is not for us, this is about Maine apples. But some people have said to me over the years, well, you know, they live in Indiana or, you know, or New Mexico or whatever. And they said, well, should I be growing Maine apples? Well, I say, well, yeah, you could try them. But what I think you should be doing, what are the Indiana apples, or what are the New Mexican apples, or what are the, you know, Minnesota apples? So this is the kind of work where we get lots of small groups or large groups in many parts of the country, all collaborating and working together to make this happen everywhere.
Thank you, John. You're a wonderful heritage, as well as all of your apples.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much to you, Mary, to Skidompha, and to everybody who joined us today. If you have other questions that weren't answered, because there were a number of them, you can contact me through Skidompha, or you can go to idapples@mofca.org, and I will do my very best to answer your questions and to identify your apple trees. So thanks again. Thanks, Mary, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, John, I think this went really well.
Oh,
Thank you.
good. I hope that was okay.
Oh, yeah, it was great. I loved your song, you know, not falling far from the tree and the seed in the tree. This is great. Wonderful poetry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I
it's great
agree.
to
Thank
see
you both.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope you were happy with that, Jeanette.
So happy. I was writing all sorts of notes and quotes from you. I'll follow up with an email, but it was wonderful. And Mary, thank you so much.
Good. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Matthew, too. I wanted to make it a little different. I hope it wasn't too quirky, but and I think it worked out well with having so much time for questions, because that actually got us into some things that I think are pretty important. So I think it actually, I was pretty happy with how it worked out.